And now, live from the service drive where hope arrives on four wheels and leaves on a flatbed, it's Fixed Ops Focus with Dave Rogers and Steve Shaw.
Mr. Rogers, what's happening tonight?
Hey, how you doing, Steve Shaw? Everything's great here. Still
Awesome.
cold in Pennsylvania, but it's still great.
Well, we put our socks on here in Florida. It's a little chilly, back in the 60s.
Oh, you got your socks back on?
Hey, I went to there's a Florida thing where you put socks on with your flip-flops. I mean, if you're an old white guy and you're a total nerd dork, you do that. And I fit that category now. So I went to dinner just a bar right down the street. Flip-flops and socks. And it's a Florida thing. Let's just call it that.
I don't know. I think Philadelphia they wear black socks in their sandals and on the beach. I think that's a thing. Shoebies or something they call them. I forget what it was.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
That's
I
like
think
good grandpa would do, That's what I think
I
about.
think they used to wear their black socks out at the beach. So
Yeah,
it might be
for
maybe they all
long
moved to
Bermuda shorts.
Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. What's going on in the dealership world right now?
It's just probably the same old, same old. The one thing I see out there, and I've been a lot on LinkedIn and a lot on these so-called expert out there that I keep reading about and stuff, is this big debate about flat rate technicians and how to pay technicians and stuff. And I talking to a couple guys about it. I was curious, what do you think of? What is your opinion on technicians, flat rate, how to pay these guys over your years of experience? What do you think?
I think the best pay plan I ever saw, I grew up in St. Louis, right? And so I also I get I get the reason why people would want to have a guarantee. Uh, and I think in today's day and age, it gets more and more difficult to flat rate, certainly under the warranty and the warranty guide, the warranty times and things like that. And I remember going through this when I was with Ford in Southern California. But I always go back to my St. Louis days because we were primarily, unionized shops, and the guys would get a guarantee of 40 hours. Um, but I worked at a company in one instance where they had a side contract. When I was with Saturn, we had our own deviation of the Teamster, or the
UAW.
UAW
Yeah.
the UAW contract. And then before I got into that, though, when I was a technician, I worked for a Jeep Eagle dealer, AMC Jeep Renault, and we became Eagle. So that's when I was a technician back in the late 80s, right? 87, 88, 89. Well, we had a pay plan, and for us kids coming up, everybody came out of St. Louis Community College. We went to work, and our goal was to get to flat rate. They gave us hourly, but at a lower rate, and then our goal was to get to flat rate. But the cool thing that they did, which I absolutely loved, at this Jeep Eagle dealer, was they paid you a guarantee of your last, basically quarter, like your last 12 weeks. You get guaranteed what if you flag 40 hours a week for the last 12 weeks, you got a guarantee of 40 hours, right? And so if you flag 50 hours for the last 12 weeks, you got a guarantee of 50 hours.
Oh, wow.
So I thought that was a great incentive for the flat rate technicians to, flag their hours, to do a great job, to hustle, make money. But if you had a bad week, you were taken care of. You know what I mean? So I think from a flat rate perspective, I'd like to talk about, lube guys too, if you want, but that's my thought on flat rate is I believe that I believe in the flat rate system, but I also believe that I believe in people. And again, I'm not running a store, but if I was running one, I would look at in that direction, of making sure my people were taken care of. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Because if my needs aren't being met, I'm going to leave. I got to go find somewhere to pay the bill. So I think it's important that we give the technicians the what do you want to call it? The security that they're going to be able to pay their bills, they're going to make the money, but we also want to incentivize them so that they can make a nice check, a nice living. You know what I mean? What do you?
Well, I think there's something with the different brands too. I think you mentioned Ford. We have some stores where we have guarantees. We have some stores that um, we have a couple stores that are union, and I had a union. I had a union when I was in always a union shops in Jersey, and then probably the best guarantee I had seen was very similar to what you were saying. That it was a 13-week rolling average.
There you go.
you factored in sick and vacation and everything else like that. You had to factor that into it. But the bottom line is if a guy and it didn't go below 34 hours and it didn't go above 40. Um, but if the whole shop was slow, and people's hours dropped a little bit, maybe everyone's, and that it doesn't work this way, but if everyone's guarantee dropped a couple hours, you didn't have to lay anybody off. You didn't have that pressure of, and that's always been one of those things that, I think the union shops and some of these hardcore rules, that lends itself to a whole issue about, it gets slow. Listen, people get laid off. There's hierarchy, there's rules about that. And the job security goes right out the window unless you're the most senior guy and you're the shop steward. You don't have security. Nobody else does, But but yeah, that's kind of what sparked the conversation too, is, Farley, the guy running Ford, basically, blaming dealerships for, technicians and flat rate hours. And, I always go back to the fact is that, the domestics have the most horrible warranty rules there are. 70% rules, taking the tranny apart, getting an estimate, you got, oil consumption tests, all the stuff that they do. Not to mention the fact that how much of this gravy have the manufacturers taken away from us? You know,
Exactly, exactly.
20 years ago, a Honda tech was making $20 an hour and he turned 100 hours a week. Guy's making 100,000 a year and he was really not busting his ass sweating, right? Your timing belt, 30K service, they were doing 15 hours, 16, 20 hours a day. I mean, they were racking up their time. These same guys now, they can't turn 100 they can't turn 100 hours because Honda took away the timing belts for the most part. They've, extended maintenance on, antifreeze is 100,000 miles, spark plugs is 120,000 miles. So now your work mix might have changed a little bit. If you remember, I mean, in the old days, 90% of the work in a Honda shop was cash,
Right.
10% was warranty. Um, but that cash work now isn't as easy. It's definitely not the quick maintenance stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a model. I like flat rate. I like the incentive. I think there's guys out there that want to make hours, like we talked about with the production incentives, 2, 3, 4,000 hours. These guys, it's out there for them, the carrot. But I do agree with you. There probably needs to be a better way and a little bit more that safety net, especially for certain brands. Some of these manufacturers, I don't care what they think, they suck. They're not do they're not doing, anybody any favors with some of their warranty policies and procedures.
100%, and thinking back to the good old days back working in Southern California and working in those Ford stores, and you got to give those guys credit. I don't know what person in their right mind would want to be a diesel technician at a domestic store, or even a diesel technician at an import store anymore. And so these guys are, they're busting their knuckles, they're busting their butts, and they're under the hood, and we're trying to find ways as a manufacturer not to pay them. And so at the dealership level, we got to find ways to pay them. Uh, the, having a conversation like that, the dealership is at fault. I would say certainly we have our faults, in the
Oh,
dealership
absolutely.
in the dealership level, and we could do things a lot better. But they will tell you that, you're supposed to be able that they do their labor time studies, with manuals, with manual wrenches and X, Y, and Z back in the day. I'm like, there's no way that that happened. If they did, they did it on a brand new car sitting in a shop and they knew exactly, you know what I mean? And everything was all set out, laid out there nicely. And so I think their labor time studies are as they're certainly doctored. I would say they're hooey. They're definitely not real world in a dealership, come in and perform the diagnosis. So that kind of stinks. So I think that uh there has to be an overall strategy. I think a dealer has to look at their overall strategy, from a labor rate strategy. How do I charge my customers? And how do I pay my technicians? And I guess you're probably going to look at, first off, how do I want to pay my people, right? What's the best way to pay my people, so that my people do have the opportunity to make a living and they can make that 100,000? Because back in the day, a Ford tech wasn't making 100 grand unless he was hustling if he was doing it. And he probably some shady stuff going on there if he's going to get a little warranty, a little warranty boost or whatever. So I think I would have to look at my overall technicians and say, and my business plan, what brand do I have, and say, how do I want to pay these people so I can attract the best people on the planet. And if that requires me to pay a little bit more, I'm okay with paying a little bit more because I can get that back through my labor rates and my pricing strategy. I can get that money. I can accomplish that through my pricing strategy. Uh, so I would first look at that and kind of decide where do I want to be in the grand scheme of things. Do I want to be the highest priced dealership in town, paying my people all the best, or do I want to be middle of the road, or I just want to be the lowest paid and not really care. So I think everybody has a strategy. Then where do you want to fall into, and then look at it from there. But the guy's got to be taken care of. There's no
Yep.
question about it, especially today.
Yep.
If we
Listen,
don't
you,
take
you
care of
want
these guys, they will go somewhere else.
there's too many people, trying to run this business based on a margin and a percentage, and I think you're right. If you're looking at it and your gross profit margin is 78, 80%. I don't care what anybody says. You're probably not paying your techs enough. It's a little bit high. Now, I don't know what the right number is because I think it does vary. If you want to do percentages, but the market will bear. I think what the market will bear as far as price goes, whether it's the retail price or what you're paying your technicians. I think that there's a lot of techs out there now, and you mentioned Ford. Some of the best technicians I've ever met in my life were domestic technicians. They could diagnose cars. They understood. They understood electricity. They just understood cars, and they could do their diagnostics. Even when the new emissions came out, and more and more electronics on it, these guys were dialed in. Um, and yet the manufacturer just tries to gig you. They don't want to pay you straight time. They don't want to pay you diagnostic. They don't want to pay you tear down. They don't want to pay you road test time. You have to laugh at some of this stuff. But one of the other thing I think is lost in the business, and I'm sure it's some places, but a lot of techs just don't know how to flat rate a car anymore. They just, they take a job and, they check it out and then they give it back to the advisor and they sit around and wait for an approval where I know in the Chrysler stores, the guys that were the best that I work with, they'd have 5 or 6 jobs they were juggling around all the time, And one guy told me, he said, I don't work on a next car. He said, I have a car on my left that's ready to go. The parts are here. Everything's ready to go. But I don't work on that car till I have another one behind it that I have the same thing. So if I don't have the parts, the approval, everything ready for the next car, I just keep bringing more cars in, diagnosing them, getting, checking them out, see if I can get an approval until I get another car I can do. And I don't see that anymore. I don't see guys that really know how to flat rate, and there's probably not a lot of guys that teach it either. So
Well,
it's not intuitive is probably part of the problem. So
there's probably that, right? And they need some shop foremen need to teach these guys how to do it. But it does go back to our first episode when we talked about performance objectives, and there isn't that objective, and no one sat down, like we used to, and sat down with the technician and said, Dave, what's a good day for you? What's your expectation? What are you capable of? Looking at your last 13 weeks, doing the whole thing and saying, is 15 hours a good day for you? Is that your goal? Is that your objective? Great. Let's go make that happen. And then based upon their performance, we, up or move down that number. And so I think that you could make the argument that the dealer's not doing that. If I was Jim Farley, I guess, and I was making that argument, say, well, you're not coaching your people every single day. 100%. That's not happening. Uh, and I believe everything falls back to those production objectives. No matter how you slice it, somebody's going to be talking to these guys every single day. You're either made your 8, your 10, your 12. And a 15-hour guy in my world is the same as an 8-hour guy, right? They have the same rights and responsibilities to make their times. And so overall, I think as an industry, we could certainly do a much better job of administering, production objectives, policing them, and making sure people were successful in that, in that right.
no, yeah, it's a good point. I think that yeah, I never say the dealer's on at fault because I know we are. We definitely shoulder some of the blame. I just like how I love the folks out there where they just, if you say something if you say something, you keep repeating it over and over again, then people start believing it, right? That's the thing, right? And I just think, there's a lot of stuff out there you know, with the people don't understand, whether, I don't know if there's going to be retail people ever listening to this or, people that are on the street that don't work in the service departments, but they don't understand the hoops that you jump through and the manufacturer makes us, you have to bring the car back 3 times to do an oil consumption test, right? Bring it back, technician's doing this, he's not getting paid for it. Um, the exchanges, right? You have to pull the radio out, get the serial number off it, put the radio back in, order an exchange, bring the car back, do the same thing. You get paid 3/10, right? All these things, customers like these inconvenience customers too, right? They think we're making up these stupid rules, yet, our people are struggling to make their hours because they have to follow these dumbass rules, you
So
know, and
yeah, we have to take that into consideration, and we're probably going to run out of time here in a little bit to get into like lube techs and express and things like that. And so if we're just talking about flat rate guys, or if we're talking about our senior team, then we got to look at that and say, okay, because I would like to. I love advanced production. I love lateral support groups and having that my team structured, but there's not a lot of that in the world anymore. So I got to look at my senior guys, my master guys, and I got to decide I want to grow them. I want to foster them, and I'm not going to worry about if a guy walks in off the street from 1,000 miles away and says I'm moving here because of family reasons. I'm going to hire him, but I'm not going to hire somebody else's master tech. I'm going to grow my own. And I'm going to look at that strategy, and then I'm going to say, okay, I got these guys. I'm going to give them the best life I can, make them work 5 days. I'm going to look at this whole thing and put a package together for a guy, and I would pay that master or that senior guy big bucks, and I'm okay with paying that guy big dollars. So I have my core. I got to have the offensive line, as you said the other day. I got to have my core people uh, that can fix a car, because that certainly is lacking. And I want to pay them handsomely. I want to pay them what I'm going to pay them the money it takes so that they can make a living, and they'll never ever leave me. So I think the compensation, the hours, and whether it's a combination of 8 hours, 10 hours, 13 hours, right? I think we should have those discussions with our teams and put those things together. So if I'm just looking at, did I pay the guy flat rate or hourly? That I think that's only part of the discussion. And then it's, am I giving them a guarantee? What are their hours? What's their schedule? Is it flexible? Things like that. I think that whole compensation package has to be taken into consideration when we do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some kind of happy medium somewhere around here. We have some techs that are on salary. They're master techs, or they're diagnostic techs, or whatever you want to call them. I mean, there's every brand has a different name for them. BMW store, we have foremen. They do work on cars, but they're really technicians, and they're helping the other guys out. They're pretty much straight salary. They don't produce a lot of hours. So there's always these hybrid type models out there. And I think you could do that with junior tax, express tax, and different things like that to set them, with a salary or hourly, and give them incentives based on, quick lube items, express if they upsell. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's going to be more and more a challenge to look at these things because, it's not getting easier to diagnose cars. There's less and less maintenance on the cars. They want to take away, all the extra things. I think the one positive bright spot I see in the industry is I think it's 9 or 10 states now have passed laws where the manufacturer has to pay the retail flat rate hours for a job now, not just
Okay.
the retail. We're not the retail, just the sale dollars. The parts markup and the retail labor rate.
I didn't
Now
know
that's
that.
gonna lend itself to a battle because where do you get your time from?
Yeah,
You
what's
know, do you take manufacturer's time times it by two? Okay, well, the manufacturer will lower the time just like they do on recalls, right?
right,
But
right.
I don't know. I think that would be a challenge to, the manufacturers are going to fight. They've been fighting this pretty good. But can you imagine a day when, to put an alternator in a car under factory warranty is an hour in New Jersey, and it's 8/10 in Pennsylvania because, you know, Pennsylvania passed a law or vice versa. Actually, Jersey did pass the law starting in April. They can do retail flat rate hours.
Wow.
And that's always the fear that they can lower the flat rate time, but you can't do that state by state. I don't think in this, I don't think you'd be able to get away with that one.
Well, shit, who's actually looked at a Chilton manual or a labor time guide in there,
Right. But we use all
especially
data.
somebody new, you
Yeah.
know? What's
Well, we've been, we use all data. We use, the different, I mean, most of the time guides built in the DMSs are, factory time times a multiplier. Um, but like Jersey's changing the law as of April, you can apply for retail flat rate hours with the state of New Jersey. So our dealer there is working on using all data for all the cash work, making sure that we build things out the right way. I'm interested to see what happens because I think it could be a big bump for your technicians in my store. There's a Mercedes store. Um, it could be a big bump for those guys. And I was talking to the service manager. I think we'll see. It'll be the first time I'm exposed to it. I know New York did it a couple of years ago, and there's a few other states. So it's I think that's one way to help. But I think we're going to have to come with some hybrid pay plans too.
I think the hybrid, well, California did something too because of, if you got to pay people hourly while they're standing around not working on cars, right?
Right.
Leave it to California to do something. I'm flat rate, but when I'm not working, I have to clock in and I get paid hourly for those hours. And again, that makes sense. From a technician perspective, that makes sense from a pay perspective. But really got to look at every. I think it's like if I went to work, like I have this mindset, like I'm always thinking, what can I do differently? How can I make things work? And how can I rally everybody? And then that goes back to the discussion we've had, privately about management, leadership, and how am I running my store? Because there are guys that are doing some cool shit, and and they're the model out there. I'm the trainer on the outside guy, and because I don't really do a lot of consulting, so I don't impose my wishes per se on how you should run your store. But when you find somebody that has that attitude that they want to learn and do different things and look at things, and they're going to hold their people, or they're going to have a good relationship with their team that they can get it done, that's super cool to me. So I'm always looking for that manager or two that wants to try something different and be a leader in the industry per se.
No, it's good. It's a good point. I think that, as this year goes on, I'm going to start tweaking a little bit of this stuff because I think that we definitely need to change it, especially in some brands. Like I said, there's some brands that I just don't think that, we're not, I'm not going to knock the brand, but, you got one brand now where they decided they're going to do us a favor by not, you don't have to clock in and out on a job. You don't have to punch in, right? But what you have to do is you have to do digital documentation. So you have to take a picture of the odometer. You have to take a picture of the VIN plate. You have to take a picture of the old part. You have to take a picture of the new part. You have to upload this stuff. You have to hope that the Wi-Fi is not there. It's a lot easier to punch out and off the job, to be honest with you, right? Um, and the problem is that, they charge you back, you get audited, whatever the case may be. It's just another way for them not to pay you,
Yep.
is really what it is.
Right.
But they tried to sell it that it was to save the technicians from punching on jobs. But no, that's not what it is. They can't even bang out a PDI in this franchise anymore. You have to take an iPad with you, take a road test, and you have to wait till the tires get up to pressure and the wheel speed sensor set. You used to be able to do a PDI in a half hour, right? Now it's taking a guy an hour and a half to do the PDI. So, they're not doing anything to help the techs out, yet they're to be the same guys that tell you that we suck. So
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I think in that brand, it's going to take some time because you got a lot of recalls going on. You got a lot of engine failures. You got a lot of things that are just holding us up. And the maintenance is not paying the bills in that store. So hard to keep technicians with certain brands. It really is.
Absolutely. Well, we better leave it on that note. Let's pick up again next week and let's talk about let's carry it on to Express. Let's carry that on to the rest of the shop. So for now,
I think it's a great idea.
For now, we'll catch up to you a little bit later, and I look forward to continuing this discussion.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Later.
Fixed Ops Focus is brought to you by Common Sense. Like, subscribe, and share on all platforms. Side effects may include advisors missing easy upsells, ROs walking out the door, CSI scores tanking, techs chasing comebacks instead of billable hours, your competition stealing your customers, and that special guilt of watching your gross profit bleed out monthly. Results may vary. Consult your Fixed Ops director before ignoring this advice.